The neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip in 1958 hummed with a sound that was distinct to the desert, a kind of electric buzzing that promised everything and nothing all at once, a siren song for the desperate and the delirious. But for Dean Martin, standing in the wings of the Copa room at the Sands, it was just the background noise of the office. He adjusted the black bow tie at his throat, the silk cool against his skin, and took a drag from a cigarette that seemed permanently fused to his fingers, the smoke curling up into the rafters where the lights were hot enough to fry an egg. Inside his tuxedo pocket, resting against his ribs, was a small, tarnished silver medal of St. Anthony, the patron saint of lost things, a remnant of a Steubenville childhood that felt 1,000,000 miles and 1,000,000 lifetimes away from the clinking glasses and the burst of brass from the orchestra warming up on stage. He wasn't thinking about the set list or the jokes. He was thinking about the stillness of a church sanctuary, the smell of beeswax candles and frankincense, and the way the light used to hit the stained glass in the mornings before the world got loud. Dean was the king of cool, the man who could slide down a banister of razor blades and land with a drink in his hand without spilling a drop. But tonight the whiskey in his tumbler was real, not the apple juice he usually used to play the part of the lovable lush. Because tonight the air in Vegas felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the storm clouds gathering over the Mojave. 2 hours earlier, a man named Salvatore Sal de St. Luciana had walked into Dean's dressing room without knocking, flanked by 2 mountains of men in ill-fitting suits that bulged with the promise of violence. Luciana wasn't a fan. He was a new muscle in town, a man who was trying to carve out a kingdom in the desert by squeezing the life out of the old guard, and he had looked at Dean with eyes that were as dead and cold as a shark's. He had offered Dean the world, shares in the new construction projects, protection for his family, a percentage of the skim that would make him wealthier than Sinatra within a year, all in exchange for a simple favor. Luciana wanted Dean to use his influence, his charm, and his access to the Nevada Gaming Control Board to facilitate a license for a new establishment that was essentially a front for heroin trafficking, a poison that Dean had seen ravage neighborhoods back east. Dean had laughed, a low, easy rumble that usually disarmed people, and poured himself a drink, turning his back on the mob boss to look in the mirror. He had refused casually, as if Luciana had offered him a ham sandwich he wasn't hungry for, simply saying, "Pass, Pally. I sing songs. I don't move junk." The silence that followed had been deafening, a vacuum where the air left the room, and Luciana had stood up, smoothed his jacket, and whispered, "Everybody sings for their supper, Dino. You'll sing for me or the music stops." Now, as the announcer's voice boomed over the PA system, introducing him to the roaring crowd, Dean felt the weight of that threat. He walked out onto the stage, the spotlight hitting him like a physical blow, and the applause washed over him, a chaotic ocean of adoration. He smiled that crooked, half-lidded smile, the one that made every woman in the room feel like he was singing just for her, and launched into Volare, his voice smooth, rich, and effortless. But as he scanned the front row, usually reserved for high rollers and visiting dignitaries, he saw an empty table with a reserved sign, and right next to it, sitting alone and looking terrified, was Father Dominic, the priest from the small Italian parish on the outskirts of North Las Vegas, where Dean sometimes snuck in for calm and confession when the noise of his life became too much. Father Dom looked out of place in his clerics amidst the diamonds and furs, his face bruised, a cut on his lips still fresh, and behind him stood one of Luciana's mountains, a hand resting heavily on the priest's shoulder. The message was clear, brutal, and immediate. The refusal had been noted, and the collateral damage had been selected. Dean missed a beat, a fraction of a second that only the conductor noticed, but he recovered instantly, sliding into a joke about his drinking to cover the momentary falter in his heart. He finished the set on autopilot, his body going through the motions of the legendary entertainer, while his mind raced with a cold, focused fury that belied his relaxed exterior. He cracked jokes, he held the microphone like a lover, he swayed with the rhythm, but inside, the kid from Ohio who had scraped and fought his way up from nothing was waking up, shedding the tuxedo mentally and rolling up his sleeves. When the curtain finally fell and the applause died down, Dean didn't head for bar or the craps table. He bypassed his dressing room, ignored the bevy of showgirls waiting for a smile, and walked straight out the back exit into the oppressive heat of the desert night, loosening his tie as he moved toward his car, a sleek dual gear that gleamed under the streetlights. He knew where they would take Father Dom. Luciana owned a warehouse district off the Strip, a place where the neon didn't reach, a place of shadows and dust. Dean drove with a terrifying precision, the radio silent, the only sound hum of the engine and the beating of his own heart. He touched the St. Anthony medal again, a reflex, a prayer without words. He wasn't a soldier like the boys who had stormed the beaches. He was a crooner, a lover, a man of leisure, but there was a code among the Italians of his generation, a deep, ancestral understanding that you did not touch a man of God, and you did not threaten a man's friends. This wasn't about business anymore. It was a sacrilege. Dean parked the car a block away from the warehouse, the gravel crunching softly under the tires, and stepped out into the darkness. He wasn't armed. He hated guns. They were clumsy, loud, and impersonal. He had something else, something Luciana didn't understand. He had the sheer, unadulterated audacity of a man who had stared down poverty and fame and found them both to be impostors. The warehouse door was guarded, but the guard was a kid, maybe 20, looking nervous. He recognized Dean immediately, his eyes widening. "Mr. Martin? What are you doing here?" The kid stammered, the gun in his hand lowering instinctively. Dean walked right up to him, close enough to smell the cheap hair oil and the fear. "I'm here to see Sal, kid, and I'm in a hurry. Open the door." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the same smooth baritone that sold millions of records. The kid, starstruck and confused, stepped aside, opening the heavy steel door. Dean walked into cavernous space, the smell of stale tobacco and gasoline assaulting his senses. In the center of the room, under a single hanging bulb that swung gently, creating shifting shadows, sat Father Dom, tied to a chair, his face swollen. Luciana stood over him, holding a lit cigar, surrounded by 4 of his men. They looked up as Dean entered, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The silence that descended was heavy, thick with the threat of violence. "Dino," Luciana said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I thought you might come, but I expected you to bring the gaming commissioner, not just your pretty face. You here to sign the deal?" Dean didn't stop walking until he was 5 feet from the mob boss. He looked at Father Dom, gave him a wink, a quick, reassuring flicker of the eyelid, and then turned his gaze to Luciana. "Let the father go, Sal. He's at early Massachusetts. You don't want him to be late. It's a sin to make a priest late for Massachusetts." Luciana laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You think this is a movie, crooner? You think you walk in here, say a few cool lines, and walk out? You refuse me. Nobody refuses me. I'm going to burn this priest, and then I'm going to burn your career, and then maybe, just maybe, I'll let you live to sweep floors in Reno." The men around him chuckled, shifting their weight, hands hovering near the bulges in their jackets. Dean reached into his pocket. Every gun in the room was drawn instantly, the metallic clicks echoing like thunder. Dean slowly, deliberately, pulled out a pack of cigarettes and his gold lighter. He lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his face, which was calm, almost bored. "You don't get it, Sal," Dean said, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted up toward the light. "I didn't come here to negotiate, and I didn't come here to fight you. I came here to save your soul." Luciana stared at him, genuinely confused. "My soul? You cracking up, Dino?" Dean took another step forward, entering the personal space of the mob boss, ignoring the guns pointed at his chest. "You touch a hair on his head, Sal, and it won't be the cops you have to worry about. It won't be the feds. It'll be every Italian grandmother from here to Jersey who lights a candle for me every Sunday. It'll be the union boys who load your trucks, the waiters who serve your food, the maids who clean your sheets. You see, Sal, you got muscle. You got guns. But I got love. People love me. They tolerate you." Dean's voice dropped lower, shedding the Vegas veneer, becoming the voice of the son of a barber. "And I know about your mother, Sal, Mrs. Luciana. Lives in Queens. Devout woman. Loves the rosary. Loves my records. Imagine how broken her heart would be if she found out her son beat a priest to death. Imagine if I paid her a visit, sat in her kitchen, had some espresso, and told her what her boy has become. That would kill her faster than a bullet, wouldn't it?" Luciana's face went pale. The threat was so unexpected, so intimately personal that it froze him. Dean wasn't threatening violence. He was threatening shame, the one thing that the old-school Italian culture feared more than death. The unthinkable act wasn't a physical attack. It was a weaponization of their shared heritage, the violation of the omen of silence by bringing the matriarch into the blood feud. "You wouldn't," Luciana hissed. "I would," Dean replied, his eyes hard as flint. "I'll fly there tonight. I'll sing her a song, holding her hand, and then I'll tell her that her son is going to hell." Dean flicked a cigarette ash onto the floor, mere inches from Luciana's polished shoes. "Cut him loose." The tension in the room was a physical weight, a taut wire ready to snap. The henchmen looked at their boss, uncertain. Luciana stared at Dean, searching for a bluff, but he found only a wall of absolute resolve. The king of cool wasn't acting. This was the man who had worked in steel mills, who had boxed for pennies, who had survived the Shark Tank of Hollywood. He was gambling his life on the sanctity of a mother's love and the fear of God. "Cut him loose," Luciana whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. One of the men hesitated, then pulled a knife and slashed the ropes binding Father Dom. The priest slumped forward, and Dean was there instantly, catching him, supporting his weight. Dean didn't look back at Luciana. He didn't gloat. He simply draped the priest's arm over his shoulder and began to walk toward the door. "Let's go, Father. I got the car running." As they moved toward the exit, their backs exposed to the guns, the air felt thin, the seconds stretching into hours. Every muscle in Dean's back was tensed, waiting for the impact of a bullet, but he forced himself to walk with a slow, steady rhythm, the same rhythm he used when he strolled onto the stage. He began to hum, softly at first, then just loud enough to be heard in the silent warehouse. Not a show tune, but an old hymn, Tantum Ergo, the Latin words flowing from a memory bank he thought had closed years ago. It was a surreal, transcendent moment. The tuxedoed superstar supporting the battered priest, singing a Eucharistic hymn in a den of thieves. The henchmen lowered their guns, confused, touched by some dormant instinct of reverence instilled in them by strict nuns and Sunday mornings of their youth. Even Luciana stood silent, defeated not by force, but by a moral authority he couldn't counter. They reached the door, the cool night air hitting their faces like a blessing. Dean helped Father Dom into the passenger seat of the dual Ghia, then walked around to the driver's side. He paused for a moment, looking up at the stars, taking a deep breath of the desert air that smelled of sage and impending rain. His hands were trembling now, just slightly, the adrenaline fading to leave a cold sweat on his brow. He got in, started the car, and drove away, leaving the warehouse and the mob boss in the rearview mirror, shrinking into the darkness until they were gone. He drove Father Dom to the hospital, waiting until the doctors had stitched him up and sedated him. He sat by the bedside for a while, fingering the St. Anthony medal in his pocket, watching the rise and fall of the priest's chest. The hospital was quiet, a different kind of quiet than the church or the warehouse. It was sterile, clinical, but safe. Dean felt profound exhaustion settle into his bones, a weariness that went beyond the physical. He had played the ultimate hand, bluffed the devil with a pair of deuces and a picture of his mother, and he had won, but he knew the cost. The innocence of the game was gone. He stood up, smoothing his tuxedo, which was now wrinkled and smelled of the warehouse's grime. He walked out to his car and drove back to the strip, the sun just beginning to bleed purple and gold over the horizon. When he walked back into the sands, the casino floor was quieting down, the graveyard shift dealing to the hardcore gamblers who had nowhere else to go. He went up to the suite, poured a drink, real whiskey this time, and walked out onto the balcony. He looked out over the city, the lights blinking out one by one as the dawn approached. He thought about the offer Luciana had made, the money, the power. It meant nothing. He thought about the look in Father Dom's eyes when the ropes were cut. That meant everything. Dean Martin took a sip of the drink, the burn familiar and grounding. He wasn't a hero. Heroes were guys like Wayne in the movies or the soldiers he met on USO tours. He was just a singer. But tonight, he had done the unthinkable. He had told the truth. He had stripped away the facade of the carefree playboy and revealed the man of faith and family underneath. And he had used that vulnerability as a shield. The phone rang in the suite. Dean let it ring 3 times before picking it up. It was Frank. "Dino, where have you been? We got a breakfast meeting with the producers." Dean smiled, tired and genuine. "I'll be there, Frank. Just had to take care of some laundry." He hung up and looked at the rising sun. He would go to the meeting. He would crack the jokes. He would sing the songs. And the world would see the Dino they wanted to see. The drink in hand, the girl on the arm, the laugh that promised a party never ended. But as he touched the metal one last time before tucking it back into his shirt, he knew that the music had changed. He had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and feared no evil. Not because he was brave, but because he knew who he was. He was Dean Martin, sure, but before that, he was Dino Crocetti, and some things he realized as he watched the light flood the desert were not for sale. The city woke up below him, oblivious to the battle fought in the dark, and Dean turned back into the room, ready to play his part again, but walking a little taller, carrying a secret victory in the rhythm of his step, a silent him in a city of noise.